Hey everyone. So during our last video check-in, spotted lanternfly came up. This is an invasive species, an invasive insect that has come over from China on a pallet of bluestone. So I just wanted to give a little more information on that because it's really interesting interplay between invasive species and globalization and how botany and kind of the neglect of botany can have impacts down the road that are unforeseen. So I'm just going to kind of be going through a PowerPoint that I made to present to the invasive species group in the Hudson River Valley. So I'll just be reading from that, and I can post this to the forum as well. So spotted lanternfly, the Latin name is Lycorma delicatula. If you look in the presentation, it's a beautiful, beautiful insect. When it's young, for its first what are called instars, the younger phases, it is black with white spots, and then it slowly transitions to be orange and black with white spots, and then it becomes this adult that has wings and are beautiful, and you can see why they call it a lanternfly. Lanternfly is the term for a larger group of insects called lanternflies. So I said this is an invasive species. Invasive means that it has come to a new area. It's not native based off of a predetermined amount of time. This insect has never been in North America. But what's at risk? Why do we care so much about this insect? Why are you going to be hearing about it in the news? Well, here's the brief list. Almonds, apples, apricots, cherries, grapes, hops, maple trees, nectarines, oak trees, peaches, pine trees, plums, poplar trees, sycamores, walnuts, and willows. All are eaten by this new introduced species that has no predators and is also toxic to insects that kill it. So we think, maybe there are going to be some predators that are going to start eating this insect. Possible. There have been some observed predators. There's an assassin bug and then also a shield bug that have been observed eating this insect, but that's not really enough for the numbers that we're seeing. During the beginning of the life cycle of this insect, so it lays an amorphous egg sac. The first instars come out of that egg sac and they have this kind of ascending, falling pattern. So they'll climb up a branch up to as high as they can, then just fall down at the slightest touch of the slightest breeze, and then they'll do it again. And that'll slowly allow them to spread a little bit further away from where they were found. When they're younger, they have a very indiscriminate diet. They can eat a lot of different things, but then they slowly narrow their host plant species down to philodendron, which is specifically in this country, we have Amur cork tree, which is in the horticultural trade. It's not a native species. It's not very widespread, but it is present. There's also one called Evodia is the genus. That's the BB tree. I haven't been able to find any recordings of it being in the horticultural industry, but that's not to say it isn't here. And then the big one is Ailanthus altissima, or tree of heaven. And at one point, it only feeds on this tree. Now, Ailanthus, tree of heaven, has been in the United States for a long time, since the 1700s. It is a pretty amazing tree. It's in Cimarubaceae, which is a very common tropical plant. Cimarubaceae are often used for malaria and kind of some diseases like that. It is, so sorry, I'm following the presentation, so it's not quite train of thought, but some of the I'm really interested in how we could use tree of heaven to decrease its numbers. So medicinally, it's used for intestinal ailments and more. It's a soft, it's a good wood for timber, cabinetry, furniture, and tool handles. So it grows quickly and it carves well. It can also be used for paper. It creates a lot of biomass. Its firewood, the amount of energy it has, is comparable to black walnut, white oak, and birch, which is actually pretty high. And then there's also a type of silk moth called the Ailanthus silk moth, or Samia cynthia, which can create silk from the tree of heaven. So traditionally, wedding dresses were made out of this silk. It's called shantung or ponji silk. And then also it could be used as goat fodder. So we could use this to be feeding animals that we would then, eat or use for other reasons. Tree of heaven is a very successful species because there's not many things that eat it in this country, but it's also salt tolerant, drought tolerant, pollution tolerant, allelopathic, so it suppresses the growth of plants around it. And it also, if you cut it, it'll come up with stump and root sprouts. So it's like a kind of a medusa. You cut off that main stalk and you'll have tons of new little growths coming from wherever those roots were. It creates prolific wind distributed seeds. So if you learn what the seeds look like, they're kind of these like orange fuzzy, not fuzzy, but in the tree they look fuzzy because they're far away, but they produce a lot of wind distributed seeds. It's one of the fastest growing temperate trees in the world. And it occupies a unique niche that makes it very suitable for urban areas and to, for roadside spaces. And we have a lot of roads in North America. So in terms of locating Ailanthus, you see it all over the place, but since it is a host species for spotted lanternfly, I went in a little bit of how they could locate it. You can use drones or helicopters to look for the seed clusters in winter. It becomes very obvious once the leaves fall to see these trees in large groups. You could potentially use drones to administer treatment or Department of Transportation employees. There's an app called IMAP Invasives, and also iNaturalist can be used to help document sightings of these things when people are out hiking or just as they're driving. After they drive, they can document it. There is a fungus that is native to, they're pretty sure it's native to North America. It is found currently in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Virginia. They also found it documented in Austria. So, it's hard to tell sometimes where fungi are native to because they don't leave as much of a fossil imprint often. But this fungus is very host specific. So it has some effect on devil's walking stick and striped maple, but very effective with tree of heaven. They did an experiment where they inoculated 100 trees with this plant, and then within a couple years, they found 14,000 tree of heaven died from this fungus. There's a potential to use another type of insect that only feeds on tree of heaven, so they could inoculate this insect and then have that insect go to all these different trees. It's called Eucryptorhynchus branti. Again, there's a long process that now we have to go through to introduce new species because, you see with the gypsy moth or with other introductions of insects that didn't go through a rigorous process, they've gone the other way and made it incredibly difficult now to intentionally introduce any insect. And then for removal of other tree of heaven trees that have been infected with this plant, you'd want to have manual removal on roadsides or precarious situations where the tree is leaning over something. Let's see. You can also use tree of heaven for oyster mushroom production. So there's an interesting research project that was done to basically inoculate a large stand of Ailanthus with oyster mushroom after it had already been girdled. So eventually you can kill the tree and then while it's still standing, inoculate it with oyster mushrooms and get fruiting out of it. Let's see. Manual removal for this insect is not going to work because it's really hard to see the egg cases, as you'll see with the slides. And also, there's just so many of them. We're not going to be able to get all of them. So what we need to do now is educate people about this. Keep an eye out for this insect. You can look at the PowerPoint or look online at spotted lanternfly. Beautiful insect, really easy to identify. And if you see it, report it to the USDA department in your area or whatever state environmental protection group there is. They will be very on top of this. There's a lot of money going toward its control. And if you have tree of heaven in your area, consider using it for one of the reasons that we stated before. You can grow mushrooms on it, you can burn it for firewood, make carvings out of it, whatever it is. So that's the overview of tree of heaven and spotted lanternfly. So here we have the historical neglect of an invasive species and just kind of letting it go willy-nilly. It spread everywhere. It wasn't a big issue, but then you have this new insect species introduced, and it can have some serious impacts on agriculture. So keep an eye out for headlines on this stuff, and if you want to learn more, look it up. It's this, there's only so much information out there, so you can become a pretty good scholar of this stuff pretty quickly. Anyway, if you have any questions, ask on the forum or email me, and I hope you learned a little bit about this insect in this tree.